Well, hello and welcome to the 9th webinar in our series. My name is Emma Bradford and I am the Floralife Technical Support Representative for the UK. And today I will be talking to you all about autumn flowers. Now, if you have any questions, please do type them into the chat feature and we will take all of these at the end of the presentation. So there'll be time at the end for all the questions. So going over our little roadmap of where I'll be taking you today. Firstly, I'll do a brief refresher on flower care and handling. Then I'll show you some everyday flowers which you can also use for autumn arrangements. I'll show you some autumn specific flower crops. And then I'll go over some fruiting branches. And lastly, I'll end with our favourite fun facts. So, if you've been following all of our webinars this year, you'll already be familiar with all the do's and don'ts of flower care. But just to give you a refresher and to briefly go over it for those who have just joined us, by far, the biggest factor affecting flower life and quality is storage temperature. Now, in order to keep flowers at their freshest and to preserve as much flower life as possible, flowers should always be stored at 1 to 3 degrees. Now, for all of you I can hear saying, well, I don't store flowers for more than a couple of days, so I don't need to keep them cold. I want to make it very clear that when I say cold storage, that doesn't mean long-term storage. So just because you're keeping them in the cold doesn't mean that you can keep them any longer. It means that you will keep them fresher. Now, there are some crops which are inherently better for long storage. So things like chrysanthemums or alstroemeria. And these can happily be stored at 1 to 3 degrees for even up to 21 days from the time they're harvested. That's very important to note, from the time they're harvested. And these won't suffer any major loss of vase life for that storage. However, for your majority of crops, strict stock row controls must be in place as well as cold storage to guarantee the best vase life for consumers. So not only do you have to limit the amount of time that you store them, but you also have to keep them in the cold, and that is the best way to keep them fresh. So for all of you who are already observing that good stock rotation, adding proper cold storage will only improve your flowers and your vase life, which will lead to even happier customers. So I want you to think of it this way. If you were selling perishable foodstuffs, would you store them in ambient temperatures for 2 days or more before selling them? If the answer is no, then you shouldn't be doing the same with your flowers either. Now, the next important aspect of flower care is hygiene. All surfaces and tools which come into contact with flowers must be cleaned at least once a day. All buckets or vases which are used to store flowers must be cleaned with a disinfecting cleaning product such as Floralife DCD before you use them. Now, I know this sounds like a lot of work, but if you implement a cleaning regime as part of your daily routine, it becomes quite easy to stay on top of it, and then it will happen naturally and consistently. Also, remember, if you are using an automatic dosing unit to dispense your flower food solution, these units also need to be cleaned monthly with a disinfecting product. Now, if you've never done this or you're unsure of how to do it, please contact your local Floralife representative who will be able to help you with all of this. When preparing your flowers, remove only the foliage that will be below the waterline and also handle them gently, they are still alive. Recut the stems using a clean, sharp tool. Doesn't matter which tool you use, so long as it is clean and sharp. And cutting them straight across is fine, they don't have to be at an angle. Always keep flowers in a flower food solution. Now, if you are storing them, a solution such as Floralife Express 200 is perfect. If they're going to the end consumer, then a solution such as Floralife Express 300 or Floralife Crystal Clear is the best. Now, remember, not all Floralife flower foods are available in all areas, so please do check with your local Floralife representative for availability in your area. And then lastly, always keep flowers out of direct sunlight, drafts, and away from fruits and vegetables. Before I talk to you about autumn-specific crop flowers, I want to highlight all of the everyday crops that can be also used in autumn arrangements. Now, the beauty of using these crops is that there aren't any special handling requirements you need to worry about when handling them, because these are crops that you handle every day. So if you haven't already, explore all of the different varieties of carnation, of rose, alstroemeria, calla lily, gerbera or jiminies for colours which would also fit into an autumnal themed arrangement. Breeders are releasing new varieties every year, so be sure to keep up with any new releases by attending industry trade shows, subscribing to publications, or by looking at breeders' websites directly. So now I'm going to show you a few examples of autumnal seasonal flowers. Now, these are crops which naturally flower during the shorter days of late summer and autumn. The first of these is nerines, which are actually a bulb-grown flower. Now, we typically think of all bulb-grown crops as spring flowers, but nerines belong to a special group of bulb crops which produces leaves first. Then once the leaves have died away, then the flowers emerge. Now, this growth habit is where nerines get their common name of naked ladies from, because the flowers bearing stems grow straight out of the ground with no surrounding foliage. Saffron crocuses also bloom in the same way. And then other typical autumn flowers are sedum, goldenrod, and chrysanthemums. Chrysanthemums are a year-round crop, I hear you say. And you'd be right. But naturally, they bloom in the autumn. It's only by controlling the light levels during production that growers are able to grow them year-round in greenhouses. And not only do chrysanthemums practically scream autumn, they also come in some amazing autumn colours. And then some other good autumn crops are brassica, which is not strictly a flower because they are grown for their decorative leaves, but they're an autumn crop all the same. There's amaranth, or also known as love lies bleeding, and this is available in a variety of forms and colours, so go explore. There's Leonotis. Now this is a South African native member of the mint family. And lastly, late season hydrangea, which come in lovely blend of greens and dark reds. So that's all very well and good, Emma. We know all of these, but how do we care for them? Well, I'm going to tell you. The thing to know about autumn-specific crops is that many are field-grown. And because of this, they can be subject to pathogens and pests, and by pests I mean insect damage. They have more bacteria on them, and that's just because they are exposed to the elements, and bacteria is everywhere, as we know. They may be also physically dirty, so they may have mud or soil on them. And lastly, they are also susceptible to the weather because they're completely uncovered. So what does that mean from a practical point of view? Well, the bacteria and mud mean that it is particularly important to make sure that you follow good hygiene practices and that you use a correctly dosed post-harvest product like Floralife Express 200 for storing your stems. The pathogens, pests and weather mean that you need to be particularly careful when purchasing. All of these factors can cause quality issues such as brown spots, petal browning, and leaf issues. So choose stems that are visibly clean and without any defects. But be aware that some defects that occur before the flowers are harvested sometimes don't show up until after the stems have been stored. And also be aware of the weather conditions that were occurring at harvest. Wet weather can cause certain defects to appear later on. So I'm going to give you an example. I had some customers which were seeing small brown spots on gerbera petals, every spring and every autumn. So at periods where the weather begins to change. Now, the customers who were seeing this saw it as a problem of botrytis and were looking at ways to treat the botrytis after harvest. Now, when my colleague Dina Gomez looked at these stems and the flowers more carefully, she confirmed that the dark spots were indeed due to botrytis. However, botrytis was not the primary cause. What Dina found was that the gerbera were infected by a pest, a mite in this case, and these mites were feeding on the petals and leaving small feeding scars on the petals. Now, these scars were present on the petals year-round, but when the conditions were just right, botrytis was developing on the feeding scars, and then they became visible. So I want you to know the botrytis was only a secondary infection. The primary cause were the mites, and they were the ones that needed to be treated pre-harvest. Now, the reason I'm telling you that is that I want you to be aware that there are some issues that show up post-harvest which actually occur pre-harvest. So that's the flowers. Let's have a look at the fruiting branches. Now, some of the crops you will see available in the autumn are malus, also known as crab apples, hypericum, ilex, which comes in a variety of colours, symphoricarpus, also known as snowberry, and calicarpa, which is also known as beautyberry. Now, fruiting branches don't really require any special post-harvest handling. They should be treated just like the same as any other cut flowers, so according to the care and handling guidelines I gave you at the beginning. However, there are some things you need to know about them. The thing about berries is that they won't continue to ripen after harvest. So they should be harvested only after they have reached the desired colour stage. The storage temperature for branches is the same as for most cut flowers, so 1 to 3 degrees. Now, if you see browning berries, and this can happen with a snowberry, this can be due to one of two reasons. And it will either be because they are infected with a pathogen from the field, or because they have suffered frost damage. And either cause will have happened pre-harvest. When you receive your stems of fruiting branches, they should be recut and stored in a solution of Floralife Express 200. So that's all of the autumn crops. Lastly, I'll finish with the fun facts. So, did you know that when leaves change colour in the autumn, we are actually seeing the true colour of the leaves? During the rest of the year, the chlorophyll inside the leaves turns them green, masking the underlying true colour. Then in the autumn, when the chlorophyll breaks down, the true colours of the leaves are magically revealed. Now, have you ever wondered why seeds are set in the late summer and autumn, but don't actually germinate till the spring? Well, that's due to a plant hormone inside the seed, which prevents it from germinating. Now, this hormone is called abscisic acid. It's the same hormone which causes the leaves to fall from the trees. And some seeds need a period of cold or wet weather to rid themselves of this abscisic acid before they can germinate. And that's why autumn is a perfect time to set seeds. So the winter weather can naturally deplete the hormone levels inside the seeds, so then they can germinate in the spring when the weather warms up. If they didn't have this hormone, seeds might germinate too soon and then be cut by the cold weather, so they wouldn't survive. And following on from that theme, some seeds go a step further, and they actually need to pass through the digestive system of an animal in order to germinate. So blackberries and raspberries are a good example of this. And if you think about it, it's a perfect plan because the seeds get dispersed and deposited in a nice nutrient-rich pile all in one go. And with that, are there any questions?
That was great, thank you, Emma. So, one question we have is, autumn arrangements often have apples, berries, mini pumpkins in them. Is this a problem for my flowers or their vase life?
That's a good question, because on the very first slide I said actually keep your flowers away from fruits and vegetables. So the reason for that is that some fruits and vegetables actually produce ethylene, and that causes a problem for the ethylene sensitive flowers. Now, most of the autumn crops that I talked about, so chrysanthemum and goldenrod and all of that, aren't particularly ethylene sensitive, but I would be careful with using them with carnations, some roses. So do bear in mind that there are some crops which are ethylene sensitive, which may not be compatible with using fruits with. Now, having said that, I think the apples would be the only ones to really need to worry about. Most of the other fruit and berries, don't think they actually produce any ethylene.
Okay, great. So I don't see any more questions in the chat. If anyone wants to do a last minute question, feel free to do so. Otherwise, we will wrap it up. So a question from Renee, and also we got a question from Craig. Emma, straight cut of stems versus angle cut of stems, would it make a difference in terms of vase life?
It makes absolutely no difference. And actually, if you go back to the webinar in August, which was the care and handling one, I explain exactly why. So the xylem actually go up, they're like kind of like straws that go up and down the stem. Cutting at an angle does absolutely nothing to increase their area, which is one of the reasons that people say cut at an angle. Cutting at an angle is absolutely not going to increase the surface area for the water to uptake. So angled or straight across, it makes absolutely no difference. You just need to make sure that your tool that you use is clean and sharp.
Perfect. I think to add to that point, I have heard using Oasis floral foam, it's sometimes nice to cut at an angle. But in terms of vase life, yes, we have never seen any vase life improvements.
Yeah, correct.
A question from Craig. Since many times it is cool in autumn and also drier air, is there anything special you need to do with arrangements to adjust for the dryness?
So the humidity range that you need to store flowers in general is 75 to 85% humidity. Anything below that, then you're right, they will start to dry out, which is a reason to keep them out of any drafts. Anything above that, then you run the risk of botrytis developing because they like botrytis likes high humidity. So yes, you do need to make sure that your temperature for storing is between 1 and 3 degrees and your relative humidity is between 75 and 85%.
That's great. So I don't see any more questions. So thank you, Emma, for the great presentation, and join us again next month.
Thanks, Mark.
All right. Thank you, guys.